Hello, everyone. Let's discuss this question from May, June 2023, variant 1-1. The question reads, explain two reasons why a researcher might use a pilot study. Before we begin, what is a pilot study? A pilot study is a small scale study conducted before the actual study, a small scale study that you're conducting before the actual study to check for the feasibility of the research. A small scale study conducted before the actual study to check for the feasibility of a research. How feasible is the research? Feasibility of the research. Now, let's begin. Explain two reasons why a researcher might use a pilot study, right? Why do you think a researcher needs to conduct a small scale study before he or she conducts the actual study? Now, taking this ahead, if we move on, the first indicative point that we have over here is identify. It helps the researcher identify problems with the research design. Now, the research design that the researcher probably does have in his or her mind, it might include certain problems. So this is, if a researcher conducts a pilot study, he or she's actually testing what the research design would be like when they'd actually be conducting their research. Another advantage, this saves the researcher a lot of time and money. Of course, spending less money and checking if the idea that you have in your mind or the research design that you have in your mind, it does it work or does it not? Does it work or does it not? It would help you save time. It would help you save money as a researcher. Of course, you wouldn't want to conduct the actual research and waste a lot of money if things aren't the way you're wanting them to be like. Number three, it reveals problems with non-cooperation or non-response by the respondents. Now, there are some cases when the respondents may not participate, they might not cooperate, right? In that case, the researcher would be disappointed. Of course, if you're conducting that very same research on a smaller scale, it would be easier for you to gauge and stop it if stop the research from conducting it if you think there's no other way out. Number four, this helps the researcher check for the suitability or otherwise of the sampling frame. Now, over here, I'd want everyone to know what the term sampling frame means. Sampling frame is the list of the individuals in the target population, right? Sampling frame is the list of the individuals in the target frame. Now, your attendance register at school can be an example of a sampling frame too. Next, or the electoral lists that you have. Now, the next example, the next indicative content may help to highlight deficiencies in the researcher's skill set. Now, when a researcher is all set to conduct a research, it is again very important that the researcher finds out if, or the researcher realizes or finds out if there is any deficiency in his or her skill set, right? There are certain requirements that a researcher needs to keep in mind when he or she is conducting a research. There's a possibility there might be something lacking in their skill set, which of course they can sooner identify through pilot study and then maybe work on it and before they actually step into the actual research. The next one, feedback may be sought that might lead to new or refined objectives. Now, the research that you've conducted on a smaller scale, the feedback that you receive from that, you could use that feedback to come up with a newer idea or a more refined objective. How do you score an 8 on 8 on this? 1 mark for making a point, 1 mark for explaining that point, 1 mark for selecting relevant sociological material, 1 mark for explaining how the material supports the point. If the point is identifying problems with the research design, this means that a researcher will be able to make modifications to the method or approach before committing to the actual study, and maybe amend how questions are worded in a questionnaire or interview schedule, the language and format used. This will lead to research that is likely to be more valid and or reliable that would have been case without a pilot study. Now, this was an 8-mark question. If we move on towards the 6-mark question over here that follows that 8-mark question. Remember, question 2 is on research methods. For question 2, you do not have a choice, so you cannot skip on or miss out on any topic. For question two is of 14 marks in total. That is divided into two questions. The first question is of 8 marks. The second question is of 6 marks. So the second question over here reads, explain two strengths of questionnaires as a research method. Pretty simple strengths of using a questionnaire in a research method. Number one, a questionnaire is, if a researcher uses a questionnaire, there is less chance of researcher bias. It can be more objective. There would be no interview effect, of course, and there would be no interviewer effect, because questionnaires would have less of involvement of the researcher as compared to the researcher conducting or collecting data through an interview. Number two, questionnaires are seen to be high in reliability, the ability to replicate as each person answers exactly the same questions. Now, in a questionnaire, you could simply design a questionnaire, take out 100 printouts, right? Replication is easier because everyone is eventually filling out the same questionnaire. The third point, easy to codify. Quantifying is quantification gets easier when you talk about a questionnaire as compared to an interview. The fourth point, it can make use of large samples. Representative data is more generalizable. Again, questionnaires, they're easy to distribute. You could get 1,000 questionnaires filled in a day, maybe, right? So you'd be able to gather data from a larger sample. That makes your research, that makes your sample more representative, which eventually leads to generalizable findings. Number five, it allows for easy comparisons to be made, patterns and trends to be identified. Of course, if you are using coding and if you are collecting quantitative data is always easier when it comes to making comparisons, identifying patterns, predicting trends, so on and so forth. Taking it ahead, they are easy to analyze, often with the use of a computer. They're quick, cheap to administer, do not require a trained interviewer. Now, this last point that I just read, this is when you're talking about using a questionnaire as compared to you using an interview. The next point, you can collect both qualitative and quantitative data. You might be able to ask open and close questions both. So there are numerous advantages, numerous strengths. Just choose any two that you know you'd be able to develop on according to the CI criteria, so that you do not end up losing marks. Again, like I keep on saying, these 8 and 6 mark questions, do not just see them as mere 8 and 6 mark questions. Content that you're learning from here, you might as well use them when you're writing an answer to question number 5, if you opt for question number 5, because you have a choice in section B. And question number 5 is an evaluative essay question that is based on research methodology and is of 26 marks. So moving on towards the criteria by the CAIE, you get the first mark for identifying the strength of questionnaires. You get the second mark for explaining why this method has that particular strength. You get the third mark for explaining why it is a strength. Now, example, less researcher bias, because they can be completed without the researcher present. They are less likely to influence the respondent. This may increase the validity of the data that is obtained. Now, I hope this has helped. Thank you.